The first warning came from the outer rim, where the mining colonies went silent one by one. Captain Zexhai of the Galactic Council received the reports with growing unease. 3 systems, then 7, then 20. Each one simply vanished from all communication networks, leaving behind only empty space where thriving worlds once existed. The Council's investigation fleets found nothing. No debris, no radiation signatures, no signs of battle, just vast stretches of void where stars and planets should have been. It was as if entire solar systems had been erased from reality itself. "Impossible," declared High Admiral Corthan during the emergency session. His forearms gestured wildly at the holographic display showing the affected sectors. Matter cannot simply disappear. There must be some explanation. But explanations became meaningless when the Devourers finally revealed themselves. The first visual contact happened at the Kepler station, humanity's small research outpost on the galaxy's edge. The automated sensors recorded everything before the station disappeared. The footage showed something that made even the Council's oldest species question their understanding of the universe. They were massive beyond comprehension, creatures that seemed to be made of living darkness. They moved through space like predators through water, their forms shifting and changing with each passing moment. Where they touched, reality itself seemed to unravel. Stars dimmed and died. Planets cracked and fell apart. Even space-time bent around them like fabric being torn. The Devourers consumed everything. They didn't destroy civilizations or harvest resources like typical conquerors. They ate the very essence of existence, leaving behind emptiness that hurt to look at. Watching them work was like seeing the universe being slowly deleted. The Council's response was swift and massive. Every member species contributed their finest warships and most experienced commanders. The combined fleet numbered in the millions, representing technology gathered from across the galaxy over thousands of years. The first battle lasted 6 minutes. Admiral Vortex watched from the command ship as his vessels approached the Devourers near the Centauri sector. The creatures didn't seem to notice the approaching fleet at first. They continued their work, methodically consuming a gas giant while smaller beings orbited around them like parasites. "All ships, open fire," Vortex commanded. The space around the Devourers lit up with every weapon the galaxy had invented. Plasma cannons that could melt moons, quantum torpedoes that could tear holes in reality, energy beams that traveled faster than light itself. The combined firepower could have destroyed entire star systems. The weapons passed through the Devourers like they weren't there. Then the creatures turned their attention to the fleet. What happened next couldn't be properly described in any language. The Devourers didn't attack in any conventional sense. They simply existed near the ships, and the ships ceased to exist. Hulls that had survived supernovas crumbled like paper. Shields that could deflect black holes failed instantly. Crews that had faced every danger the universe offered simply vanished along with their vessels. Vortex's command ship was among the last to fall. As the darkness closed around him, he managed to send one final message to the Council. Conventional warfare is useless. Find another way. The defeats continued for months. Every strategy failed. Every weapon proved worthless. The galaxy's greatest military minds threw everything they had at the Devourers, only to watch their forces disappear without making any impact. Panic spread across civilized space. Entire species began evacuating their homeworlds. Trade routes collapsed as merchant vessels refused to travel. The Galactic Council, which had maintained peace for over 10,000 years, watched helplessly as everything they had built crumbled before an enemy they couldn't fight, couldn't understand, and couldn't even properly see. In the depths of their desperation, Counselor Threnai made a suggestion that horrified her colleagues. "There is one member species we haven't consulted," she said during what many believed would be their final meeting. The council chamber, usually filled with representatives from hundreds of worlds, now held only a few dozen survivors. "The humans?" asked Chancellor Morden, his voice filled with disgust. "Those primitives barely achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. What could they possibly offer?" Threnai pulled up humanity's file on the central display, the data made for uncomfortable reading. Where other species' histories spoke of art, philosophy, and scientific advancement, humanity's record was an endless catalog of violence. Wars that lasted centuries, weapons designed to kill their own species, technologies created for the sole purpose of causing suffering. Look at their military history. Threnai insisted. They've been fighting continuously for their entire existence. Not just external threats, but each other. They've turned warfare into an art form. They've weaponized everything they've ever discovered. Exactly why we barely accepted them into the council, Chancellor Morden replied. They're savages. Barely civilized barbarians who solve every problem with violence. Maybe that's exactly what we need, Threnai said quietly. The debate that followed revealed the galaxy's true desperation. These were beings who had transcended violence millennia ago, who viewed warfare as a primitive solution to problems that diplomacy and technology should solve. The idea of asking humans for military advice was like asking children to perform surgery. But the Devourers were consuming another system every day. Soon there would be nothing left to save. The vote was close, but fear won over pride. The message that went out to Earth was unlike anything in galactic diplomatic history. Usually, the Council's communications were formal documents filled with proper protocols and careful language. This message was different. It was desperate. People of Earth, it began. The galaxy faces extinction. Our enemies cannot be fought with conventional weapons or strategies. We have tried everything our civilizations know, and we have failed. We turn to you not because you are our allies, but because you are what we fear we must become. We need your monsters. The response from Earth came faster than anyone expected. While other species required months to mobilize their forces, humanity's reply arrived within days. It wasn't sent through official diplomatic channels. Instead, it came from someone identifying themselves only as Admiral Chen. Message received, the transmission said. We're coming. Don't thank us yet. As the council members prepared for humanity's arrival, many wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. They had called for help from a species known for their violence and ruthlessness. They had asked monsters to save them from monsters. What they didn't know was that Earth's government had no intention of sending their best people to fight the Devourers. They were sending something far more dangerous. They were sending the ones that even humans feared. The galaxy had asked for monsters, and humanity was about to deliver exactly what they asked for. Whether that would save them or doom them remained to be seen. The ships that arrived at the Council's emergency headquarters looked wrong. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the alien station grow larger on the view screen. Behind her, 300 vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a formation that made the Council's military advisors nervous. These weren't the clean, elegant ships they expected from a species, requesting membership in galactic civilization. These were warships built by people who understood that sometimes beautiful things needed to die. Admiral, called her communications officer, a woman whose face bore scars from the Martian prison riots. The Council is requesting permission to inspect our fleet before allowing us to dock. Chen almost smiled. Tell them they can inspect whatever they want. They won't understand what they're looking at anyway. She was right. When the Council's inspection teams boarded the human vessels, they found technology that confused and disturbed them. Weapon systems that seemed designed to cause maximum suffering rather than quick death. Medical bays that looked more like torture chambers. Computer systems that appeared to be running programs the inspectors couldn't identify, but instinctively feared. The crew members were even more unsettling. Dr. Marcus Webb, the fleet's chief scientist, greeted the alien inspectors with a smile that never reached his eyes. Before joining Chen's mission, he had spent 12 years in solitary confinement for conducting illegal experiments on human subjects. The Council's representatives found his enthusiasm for their biological data deeply uncomfortable. Commander Elena Vasquez handled the weapons demonstration. She had been serving a life sentence for war crimes committed during Earth's colonial expansion when Chen recruited her. The casual way she discussed turning entire star systems into weapons made the alien military experts physically ill. "Where are your heroes?" asked Counselor Threnai during the formal meeting with Admiral Chen. "Your best soldiers, your greatest minds, your most noble warriors?" "Still on Earth," Chen replied. "You didn't ask for our heroes. You asked for our monsters." The truth was worse than the Council had imagined. Every person Chen had brought was someone that Earth's government wanted gone. They were criminals, exiles, and individuals whose methods were too extreme even for humanity's military. They were the ones locked away in the deepest prisons, the ones whose names were removed from official records, the ones whose existence was an embarrassment to human civilization. Chen herself had been court-martialed for ordering the bombardment of civilian targets during the Martian Independence War. Her defense had been simple. The targets were technically civilian, but they were manufacturing weapons for rebels. The court had found her guilty of war crimes. The evidence suggested she had been proud of it. "You don't understand what you're fighting," Chen told the assembled council members. "Your species have been civilized for so long that you've forgotten what it means to truly hate something. You fight to protect what you love. We fight to destroy what we hate." She activated a holographic display showing humanity's history. The images were difficult for the alien representatives to watch. Humans fighting humans with weapons designed to maximize casualties. Cities reduced to radioactive wasteland. Populations enslaved or exterminated for no better reason than they existed. "This is what you called for," Chen continued. "You've tried diplomacy, strategy, and conventional warfare. Now you need someone who understands that sometimes the only way to solve a problem is to become a bigger problem." The council members exchanged uncertain glances. They had expected Earth to send military advisors, perhaps some unusual weapons technology. Instead, they had received what appeared to be a floating asylum filled with humanity's worst examples. Dr. Webb presented his preliminary analysis of the Devourer recordings. His conclusions made the assembled aliens question their decision to contact Earth at all. "These creatures aren't just consuming matter," he explained. His voice filled with the kind of excitement that made listeners deeply uncomfortable. "They're consuming the underlying structure of reality itself. It's like they're editing the universe, removing sections they don't approve of." "How do we fight such beings?" asked Chancellor Mordan. Webb's smile was the kind that parents warned their children about. "We don't fight them. We study them. We learn how they work. Then we become something they're afraid of." The human approach to the Devourer problem was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. While the Council's strategists continued trying to find military solutions, the humans began treating the invasion as a research opportunity. Commander Vasquez requested detailed information about every system the Devourers had consumed, not to plan rescue missions or defensive strategies, but to understand their feeding patterns. Dr. Webb wanted biological samples from any surviving witnesses, claiming he needed to study how exposure to the creatures affected different species. Most disturbing of all, Admiral Chen requested complete military authority over all operations in sectors where Devourers had been sighted. When the Council hesitated, she made her position clear. "You can keep your politicians and your protocols," she said, "but if you want us to solve this problem, you need to let us solve it our way. That means no oversight, no restrictions, and no questions about our methods." "What are you planning?" asked Counselor Threnai. "Something that will probably make you wish the Devourers had won," Chen replied honestly. The vote to grant humanity military authority was even closer than the vote to contact them. Many council members argued that giving such power to what appeared to be a collection of criminals and madmen was more dangerous than facing the Devourers alone, but the reports from the Outer Rim were getting worse. 3 more systems had fallen in the past week. The Devourers seemed to be accelerating their consumption, as if they were preparing for something larger. Fear won again. Within hours of receiving authorization, the human fleet began implementing strategies that made the Council's military advisors physically sick. Instead of trying to protect populated systems, Chen ordered the evacuation of entire sectors. Instead of engaging the Devourers directly, her forces began herding them toward unpopulated regions using methods the Council didn't want to understand. "What are they doing?" Chancellor Mordan asked his intelligence chief after reviewing the human fleet's movements. "I don't know," came the honest reply, "but they're doing it with the kind of precision that suggests they've planned for this exact situation before." That was perhaps the most terrifying realization of all. Humanity had been preparing for a war against beings like the Devourers long before they knew such creatures existed. They had spent centuries developing strategies, weapons, and tactics for fighting enemies that transcended normal understanding. They had been preparing to fight gods, and now they finally had their chance. As the human fleet moved deeper into Devourer-controlled space, the last transmission from Admiral Chen to the Council was characteristically brief. "We're going to show these things what real monsters look like. Try not to watch too closely." The galaxy held its breath, wondering if they had traded one extinction for another. The first successful capture of a Devourer fragment happened in the Kepler sector, where the nightmare beings had consumed Admiral Chen's former research station. The human fleet approached the consumption zone with equipment that made the Council's observers question everything they thought they knew about the laws of physics. Dr. Webb watched from his modified laboratory ship as the trap engaged. Instead of trying to destroy or repel the Devourers, the humans had built something that could contain pieces of them. The technology involved turning entire star systems into massive prison cells, using gravitational fields that shouldn't exist and energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Specimen secured," Webb announced over the fleet communication system. His voice carried the kind of satisfaction that made listeners want to shower afterward. Beginning preliminary analysis. What the humans discovered changed everything. The Devourers weren't invaders from another galaxy or dimension. They were antibodies. The universe itself was sick, infected with something the creatures were trying to eliminate. Every system they consumed, every civilization they erased, was part of a cosmic immune response to a disease that had been growing for millions of years. The disease was intelligent life itself. Think of it like cancer, Webb explained to the horrified council representatives via secure transmission. Consciousness is a mutation. Civilization is a tumor. The Devourers are the universe's way of removing the infection before it spreads too far. Chancellor Morden's voice shook when he responded. "You're saying that our existence is what caused this? That we deserve to be eliminated?" "Deserve has nothing to do with it," Webb replied. "But yes, from the universe's perspective, we're the problem they're trying to solve." The revelation split the human fleet down the middle. Commander Vasquez led the faction that saw vindication in the discovery. If intelligent life truly was a cosmic infection, then humanity's violent nature wasn't a flaw but a feature. They were natural antibodies fighting other antibodies, and the most aggressive immune system would win. Dr. Webb led the other faction, the one that found the situation morally fascinating. Rather than justifying, he wanted to understand the mechanism, to learn how consciousness had become classified as a disease. His research methods became so extreme that even Chen had to impose restrictions on his experiments. "I need living subjects," Webb argued during one of their heated discussions. The Devourer fragments respond differently to conscious minds versus artificial intelligence. "I need to understand the exact nature of the infection they're trying to cure." "You're not experimenting on our people," Chen replied firmly. "I wasn't talking about our people," Webb said with that smile. The conversation that followed was one that council members would later claim never happened. The official records would show that humanity never requested permission to use captured enemy soldiers for research purposes. They would deny that any discussion took place about treating prisoners of war as laboratory subjects. But the truth was recorded in Chen's personal logs, files that would remain classified long after the crisis ended. "We need test subjects who represent the infection the Devourers are trying to eliminate," Webb had explained. "Representatives from various species, different levels of consciousness development, varied biological types. We need to understand what triggers their response." "You're talking about experimenting on sentient beings," Chen said. "I'm talking about saving the galaxy," Webb replied. "The Devourers see consciousness as a disease. We need to understand their diagnostic criteria so we can either cure ourselves or convince them we're already dead." The experiments that followed would haunt them, survivors for the rest of their lives, using volunteers from the Council's own military forces. Webb began testing how the Devourer fragments responded to different types of consciousness. The results were as brilliant as they were horrifying. Highly intelligent species triggered stronger reactions from the fragments. Beings with advanced technology, complex social structures, and sophisticated emotional responses were identified as priority targets for elimination. But there were exceptions. Certain types of consciousness seemed to confuse the Devourers. Minds that had been damaged by violence, broken by trauma, or twisted by extreme experiences didn't register as clear threats. They were classified as something between infection and cure, too damaged to spread but too dangerous to ignore. "We're natural camouflage," Chen realized after reviewing Webb's data. "Our violence, our trauma, our willingness to commit atrocities, it makes us harder for them to classify." The discovery led to humanity's most controversial decision. Admiral Chen called it adaptive immunity. If the Devourers were trying to eliminate consciousness as an infection, then humanity would become a worse infection. They would transform themselves into something so thoroughly broken, so fundamentally wrong, that the universe's immune system would retreat rather than risk contamination. The plan required turning entire sectors of space into laboratories for consciousness modification. Human technology, already more advanced than the Council had realized, was repurposed for experiments that pushed the boundaries of what could be called ethical or sane. They began with their own people. Volunteers from Chen's fleet underwent procedures that rewrote their neural patterns, enhanced their capacity for violence, and removed psychological barriers that prevented them from committing atrocities. The results were soldiers who made the original crew look like humanitarian workers. Then they began modifying the captured Devourer fragments. Webb's research had revealed that the creatures could be influenced, their programming adjusted through exposure to specific types of consciousness. The humans began broadcasting modified neural patterns into the fragments, trying to convince them that this region of space was already beyond saving. The broadcasts contained recordings of humanity's worst moments. Genocides, torture, the deliberate destruction of entire ecosystems for profit. But they also contained something else. Evidence that the consciousness in this region had learned to fight back against its own nature. "We're showing them evolution," Webb explained to the increasingly horrified Council observers. "Not just biological evolution, but consciousness evolving past the point where it poses a threat to universal stability." The psychological warfare was working. Devourer activity in human-controlled sectors began to slow. The creatures seemed confused, uncertain whether the consciousness they encountered was infection or cure. Some fragments even began to retreat, as if they were afraid of contamination from something worse than what they were trying to eliminate. But the cost was becoming clear to everyone involved. The humans implementing Chen's plan were changing in ways that made their original criminal nature seem mild by comparison. The modified neural patterns designed to confuse the Devourers were also making the humans less recognizable as the species the Council had contacted. They were becoming something new, something that might save the galaxy or destroy it more thoroughly than the Devourers ever could. "We're winning," Chen reported to the Council during their last official communication. "The Devourers are retreating from our sectors. But I need you to understand something important." "What?" asked Councillor Threnai. "We're not going to be the same species when this is over. What we're becoming, it might be worse than what you asked us to fight." The silence that followed lasted for several minutes. "Are you asking permission to continue?" Threnai finally asked. "No," Chen replied. "I'm warning you about what's coming next." The weapon that Admiral Chen unleashed in the Vega system would later be known as the reality virus. Dr. Webb had spent months refining it, using data from their Devourer experiments to create something that could infect the fundamental structure of space-time itself. The Council watched the test from a safe distance of 30 light-years, their sensors recording everything. What they saw challenged their understanding of what was possible, what was sane, and what should ever be attempted by thinking beings. The virus didn't destroy the Devourers in the traditional sense. Instead, it convinced local reality that the creatures had never existed in the first place. Space-time rewrote itself around the infection, editing out the presence of beings that could edit out everything else. The effect spread like wildfire, consuming not just the Devourers but the very concept of them within the affected region. "Magnificent," Webb whispered as he watched the readouts. "We've created a lie so convincing that the universe believes it." The Devourers in surrounding systems began to retreat. Not because they were defeated, but because they were afraid. For the first time since the invasion began, the cosmic antibodies encountered something that posed a greater threat to universal stability than the consciousness they were trying to eliminate. Humanity had become a disease that could infect diseases. But the weapons' effects didn't stop at the Devourers. The reality virus began spreading beyond its intended targets, rewriting sections of space that had been considered fundamental constants for billions of years. Gravity worked differently in the infected zones. Light traveled at varying speeds. Physical laws became suggestions rather than rules. "We need to contain this," Chen ordered during an emergency meeting with her senior staff. The meeting took place on a ship that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, a side effect of operating too close to reality-infected space. "Contain it?" asked Commander Vasquez, whose recent neural modifications had given her eyes that reflected light in ways that hurt to look at. Why would we want to contain the most effective weapon ever created? Because it's not stopping, Chen replied, showing them the spread projections. At current rates, the virus will consume this entire galactic arm within 6 months. After that, it'll keep going until it reaches the galactic core. Webb laughed, a sound that no longer seemed entirely human. You say that like it's a bad thing. We're giving the universe what it wanted, the elimination of consciousness as a threat to stability. We're just doing it more efficiently than the Devourers. The philosophical divide that had been growing within the human fleet finally exploded into open conflict. Half of Chen's forces believed they were saving the galaxy by becoming something worse than what threatened it. The other half realized they might have become the very thing they were fighting against. The Civil War lasted 3 days and reshaped local space-time permanently. Chen's faction fought to limit the damage, to find ways to control the weapons they had unleashed. Vasquez's faction fought to accelerate the process, arguing that consciousness was indeed a cosmic infection that needed to be eliminated before it spread further. The battles were fought with weapons that shouldn't exist, using strategies that violated the basic principles of warfare. Ships fired bullets made of crystallized time. Entire stellar systems were turned into ammunition. Soldiers used consciousness itself as a weapon, broadcasting modified neural patterns that could drive enemy crews insane or convince them they had never existed. The Council's observers, watching from what they hoped was a safe distance, sent increasingly desperate reports back to their governments. The humans weren't just fighting the Devourers anymore. They were fighting each other, and their conflict was causing more damage than the original invasion. They've lost control, reported Captain HFY from his observation post. The weapons they created to fight the Devourers are being used against their own people. Reality itself is breaking down in the combat zones. The message that came back from the Council was brief. Prepare for immediate evacuation of all Council personnel from human-controlled space. But evacuation proved impossible. The humans had modified space-time so extensively that faster-than-light travel no longer worked reliably in their territory. Ships attempting to leave found themselves arriving before they departed, or emerging in realities where they had never been built in the first place. The galaxy was trapped, watching its saviors tear themselves apart with weapons that made the Devourers look like a manageable threat. Chen's final gambit came when she realized that the only way to stop the reality virus was to give it something more interesting to consume than local space-time. Working with the remnants of Webb's research team, she began broadcasting a modified version of human consciousness directly into the infected zones. The broadcast wasn't random. It was carefully crafted to represent everything wrong with intelligence as a cosmic force. Every atrocity humanity had ever committed, every act of unnecessary cruelty, every moment of pure malice was encoded into the signal and transmitted at frequencies that could affect the fundamental structure of reality. We're poisoning the poison, Chen explained to her remaining officers. If consciousness is an infection, then we're making ourselves so thoroughly toxic that even other infections won't want to spread to us. The strategy worked, but at a cost that would haunt the survivors forever. The reality virus, confronted with a form of consciousness so fundamentally corrupted that it posed a threat to the concept of existence itself, began to retreat, but it took with it every trace of human presence it had encountered. Ships, crew members, entire research stations simply ceased to exist as the virus fled, carrying away everything it had touched. The Devourers, meanwhile, completed their own retreat, faced with a region of space that had become more dangerous than the infection they were trying to eliminate. The cosmic antibodies moved on to other parts of the galaxy, leaving the local systems under what amounted to quarantine. Chen found herself alone on her flagship, one of the few vessels to survive the cascade of reality failures that followed her final gambit. Her crew was gone, not dead but simply never having existed. Her fleet had been erased from history so thoroughly that the universe couldn't remember why the ships had been built. The communication she received from the Council came from beings who no longer remembered asking for her. Help, unknown vessel, the transmission began. You are in violation of galactic quarantine protocols. Identify yourself and state your purpose in this restricted zone. Chen stared at the communication screen for a long time before responding. The Council had gotten what they wanted. The Devourers were gone, but they had also gotten something they never asked for. A region of space where reality worked differently, where the laws of physics were more like suggestions, and where something that had once been human still watched and waited. "This is Admiral Chen of Earth Fleet," she replied. "We're the solution to your problem. Try not to create any new problems." The response came quickly. "We have no record of any species called humans or any authorization for your presence in Council space." Chen smiled, an expression that would have terrified anyone who remembered what smiles were supposed to look like. The galaxy had called for aid, and humanity's monsters had answered. The price of that answer was becoming clear, but the bill was far from being paid in full. The trial began 6 months after the last Devourer sighting, in a courtroom that existed in 17 different realities simultaneously. The council had spent weeks figuring out how to prosecute beings whose existence they couldn't officially acknowledge, for crimes committed using weapons that shouldn't be possible. Admiral Chen stood in the defendant's dock, which existed in normal spacetime only when convenient. Around her, the surviving members of her fleet waited in containment fields designed by scientists who were still trying to understand what the humans had become. "The charges," announced Chancellor Mordan, "are genocide, reality manipulation, violation of the fundamental laws of physics, and crimes against the basic structure of existence itself." Chen's laugh echoed across dimensions that weren't supposed to touch each other. "You forgot the most important charge. We saved your lives." The evidence presented during the trial painted a picture that made the assembled representatives question whether survival had been worth the cost. Entire sectors of space were now uninhabitable, not because they had been destroyed, but because reality worked differently there. Ships entering those zones emerged with crews who remembered lives they had never lived. Planets existed on Tuesdays but not on weekends. Time flowed backward near stars that had been used as weapons during humanity's civil war. "Look at what you've done," Counselor Threnai said, gesturing at the holographic displays showing the damaged regions. "You've broken the universe itself." "No," Chen replied calmly. "We've modified it. The universe was already broken, or the Devourers wouldn't have existed in the first place. We just broke it in a different way." Dr. Webb, testifying from a containment cell that existed in several different states of reality, explained the theoretical framework behind their actions. His neural modifications had progressed to the point where his thoughts operated on frequencies that most species couldn't perceive directly. "Consciousness was always going to be a problem," he said, his words causing headaches in listeners who tried to follow his logic. "The universe is designed for entropy, for things to break down and spread out until everything is cold and dark and quiet. Intelligence fights that process. We build things, create order, generate complexity." "So you decided to eliminate consciousness entirely?" asked the prosecutor. "We decided to camouflage it," Webb corrected. "Make it look like something the universe's immune system would avoid rather than attack." The Devourers retreated because they couldn't tell the difference between consciousness and the cure for consciousness. The philosophical implications of humanity's actions became the focus of heated debate among the Council's greatest thinkers. Had the humans saved civilization by becoming something that no longer qualified as civilized? Had they found a solution or simply traded one existential threat for another? Commander Vasquez, representing the faction that had wanted to accelerate the reality virus spread, testified with the enthusiasm of someone who had solved an important puzzle. "You're all still thinking like the old universe," she explained to the horrified court. "Rules, laws, physics that make sense. Those are luxuries you can afford when you're not facing extinction. We gave you something better than survival. We gave you immunity." "Immunity from what?" asked Chancellor Mordan. "From ever having to face another cosmic threat like the Devourers," Vasquez replied. "Any force powerful enough to threaten galactic civilization? We'll take one look at what we've done here and decide to find an easier target." The truth of her statement was becoming evident in the reports coming from Council scout ships. Other galaxies, ones that had previously been interested in establishing contact with the Milky Way, were now maintaining careful distances. Something about the local spacetime modifications was broadcasting a warning that discouraged investigation. Humanity had turned their home galaxy into the cosmic equivalent of a quarantine zone. The Council faced an impossible decision. They could execute the humans for their crimes against reality, but that would require developing new ways to kill beings who existed partially outside normal spacetime. They could exile them, but the humans had already demonstrated that conventional methods of transportation and containment didn't work reliably in their presence, or they could accept that this was the new reality. We propose a compromise, Chen said during the final day of testimony. You get your galaxy back, mostly intact and definitely free of devourers. We get to continue existing in the form we've chosen. Everyone wins, and what exactly are you proposing? Asked Counselor Threnai. Managed isolation, Chen replied. We withdraw to the regions of space we've already modified, the zones where reality works according to our rules instead of yours. You avoid those areas, we avoid yours. Think of it as a permanent vacation for both of our species. The debate that followed lasted for days. Some council members argued that allowing the humans to establish their own territory would set a dangerous precedent. Others pointed out that the alternative was attempting to police beings who could rewrite the laws of physics when inconvenienced. Fear won again, as it had throughout the crisis. The final agreement was officially called the Temporal Sovereignty Accord, though most beings simply referred to it as the Monster Treaty. Humanity was granted permanent control over the sectors they had modified during their war against the Devourers, with the understanding that they would not expand beyond those boundaries without council approval. In exchange, the humans agreed to serve as a final line of defense against any future existential threats to galactic civilization. You're making us your guard dogs, Chen observed during the signing ceremony. You're making yourselves our nightmares, Chancellor Mordan replied. It seems like a fair trade. The evacuation of human-controlled space took 3 months and required technologies that most council species preferred not to understand. The final transport ships left carrying refugees who swore they could still hear whispers in languages that didn't exist, from people they had never met but somehow remembered. Chen's farewell message to the council was broadcast from coordinates that showed up differently on every sensor array that tried to track them. You asked for monsters, she said, and we became what you needed us to become. We'll be here watching from the spaces between stars, using technology that shouldn't exist to guard against threats you hope you'll never face. The transmission paused, filled with static that sounded almost like screaming. Try not to need us again, Chen continued, because next time we might not be interested in leaving you alive to regret asking for our help. The communication ended, leaving the council chamber in silence. Years passed. The sectors under human control became the subject of whispered stories and careful scientific observation from extreme distances. Ships that strayed too close to the boundaries reported strange phenomena. Time moving at different rates, gravity working sideways, stars that sang songs in frequencies that made listeners weep for reasons they couldn't explain. The humans themselves were rarely seen, though their presence could be felt by anyone sensitive enough to detect the subtle modifications they continued making to local spacetime. They had become the galaxy's immune system, the monsters in the darkness that kept worse monsters at bay. New civilizations joining the council were warned about the quarantine zones and told the official story these were regions damaged during the Devourer War, too dangerous for normal traffic. The full truth was classified at levels that required special authorization to access. But sometimes, when new existential threats appeared at the galaxy's edges, they would encounter scout ships emerging from the quarantine zones. The threats would withdraw quickly, as if they had seen something that convinced them to find easier prey elsewhere. The council never asked what those scout ships showed the potential invaders. They were afraid the answer would be worse than whatever they were being protected from. In the depths of modified space, Admiral Chen continued her work, commanding beings who had once been human but were now something harder to define. They watched, they waited, and they prepared for the next time the galaxy would need something worse than its enemies. The price of salvation had been paid in full, but the interest would continue accumulating for as long as consciousness existed in the universe. And in the quiet moments between crises, when the galaxy slept peacefully under the protection of its monsters, some council members wondered if they had made the right choice. Most decided they didn't want to know the answer.